All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Launchpad podcast. It is currently 4 a.m., and that's why I am in my robe right now. But welcome back. In today's episode, I talked to my buddy James from the great state of Colorado. James is a psychedelic facilitator there. He actually holds space for people undergoing psilocybin experiences and things like that. And he came on today to give us some updates and what is happening with the laws there in Colorado surrounding psychedelics. It's some really interesting things going on, so we brush up against that. We also talk about the LSD sort of subculture within America. We talk about a lot of cool things. It was a good conversation. I hope that you enjoy it. If you'd like to reach out to James, get in contact with him, you can find his information and stuff like that in the description down below. If you haven't already, you should check out our company, not James's company, but my company, Minnesota Nice Ethnobotanicals. We sell Amanita, Kava, Kana, Blue Lotus. We're probably one of, if not the largest exporters and importers of Amanita muscaria in the United States. And whenever you support that business, you help support me, so I really appreciate it. But anyways, hope you guys have a beautiful day in the Matrix. Peace out from the Launchpad. It seems like the culture, a lot of times the culture around the sort of like New Year, at least like where I live in the Bible Belt, Midwestern Kentucky, the culture is, a lot of it is driven around like alcohol. The alcohol culture is heavy, and because of that, it's got its influence in all of it. And so a lot of what the culture is here around New Year's is like big alcohol fueled blowouts that, and some people do. And like I said, I really eat it up when people have a very positive mind frame about like going into a new year. And there is some of that, but I've noticed, and I think this is like America in general, a lot of America in general, because there's a whole sort of meme around this, but like, especially where I live, I've noticed this is there's a certain influx of maybe creativity or inspiration or motivation to make things change, but they usually don't persist. That's a big part of the culture too. And there's even the whole meme thing about the whole thing about like, and statistically people buy the most gym memberships, right after the new year. And statistically, most people don't stick with it. But it's not just, the gym or anything. It's just a lot of different facets of life. But yeah, I think that and especially with like this new psychedelic renaissance, this new world that we're bringing in, I think that a reframing of how we approach the new year is really, really interesting and cool. Yeah.
And I'd love to see like what we've been doing out here in Colorado, try to like spread more to the rest of the country. Like, for example, like the ecstatic dance events that I went to was alcohol free, no alcohol at all. Like they had like juice, they had like yerba mate, chai teas, they had a guy that made chicken broth and bone broth and mushroom broth, just like all things to like nourish yourself. There was like quiet tea space where you had someone making tea for you. It was just very intentional of like we're trying to shift the energy of what this culture has put together. And like living in Boulder is like an amazing experience for me because like I said, like I grew up in the East Coast, very similar alcohol culture and all of that. And here, like I have the opportunity to go to a sauna and cold plunge club like almost every day. And it's just like minded people who want to talk about things who are like the last thing that they really want to do is go drink a beer. Maybe like every once in a while or whatever, because it's Colorado and they have good beer, but it's really just changed the whole overall energy about how people carry themselves. And I've even noticed it like going to Red Rocks, like going to Red Rocks out here for a younger focus show like Closey, Alice Dreams, like those kind of groups. So I got Ganja White Night, and like you show up, and instead of everybody just like pounding beers and being like so disconnected from everybody, instead everybody is more conscious of people's space. They're more willing to be there for people and be supportive. And it's given me a lot of new hope in like your generation. Like now I'm 40, but like the 20s and the early 30s and like how that's developing. I think you got a lot of space that it can really develop into. And I just encourage that everybody in their community tries to foster that to the best that they can.
Yeah, that's I appreciate that insight because I remember the last music festival I went to, I had taken a very large dose of LSD and I had this vision and this insight to the whole sort of music festival culture, especially American music festival culture in general. And I saw, and I told, I told my friend in one of these profound moments on LSD, I grabbed his shoulder. I was like, bro, I had figured it out. But, I was like, I get it. I was like, we have unspokenly all created this hive mind like network that is a safe place for people to do hallucinogenic drugs. And of course, there's a lot of other things that go on at these places than taking psychedelics, right? There's, like you said, sound baths, ecstatic dancing, the music. There's a whole very important entire matrix that goes around it. I think every piece of it is just as essential as the psychedelic drugs, right? But like, when I look at people and I talk to people and I get to know people at these festivals, and it's like every person I meet, it's like, oh, I see, like you wanted a safe place to do this just like I did too. And we have all unspokenly kind of created this. Now, not saying that it's optimal or anything like that, right? I think that it's can always be further optimized. But it's just interesting because and we're going to unpack some of this within the episode, but there's this whole new world that we're stepping into with psychedelics becoming legalized, yet this certain culture has persisted and these certain safe places have persisted even through prohibition. And I think that it was very unconsciously, intentionally done by us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and I think it's because it's carried through multiple generations of people that had to be so hush about what was happening, even though the right people knew that these places existed. And now we're getting to the point where we can actually tell people what we do and like not be ashamed of it and not be looked down upon. And like people are accepting that what we're doing is real healing work. And like it's really changed a lot in the past 20 years for me. And seeing how that's developed has been a really positive impact on my life for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something that we brushed up against slightly in our first episode together, but I kind of wanted to talk to you more about this. Because I can see through your Instagram and through the conversations that we've had with one another that you have also been a part of this sort of like really interesting, and you're older than I am, so you've been more heavily involved with it for a longer period of time than I have been and seen it evolve even more so than I have. But there's this really interesting like subculture within America where we've been doing this and we've had the safe spaces, and then you and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you facilitate psilocybin experiences and you primarily focus kind of on psilocybin. I know there's other tools used, but it seems like from our last conversation, like psilocybin was the big
especially
one.
especially the conversations that I can have super publicly. But like
Right.
if people want to contact me about other things, they could definitely talk about this.
Right. Right. And, I've seen a big push over the past 5 to 10 years for psilocybin, and rightfully so, right? But there's this sentiment sometimes, even within the psychedelic space, and the LSD seems like a touchy one, right? It doesn't seem like it's as advocated for. It doesn't seem like there's this whole sort of airy fairy, this is the magic type of. LSD seems to still have the sentiment around it and this narrative around it of like, be careful. And I think you should be with all of these things, absolutely. But there's something, man. There's something with the combination of LSD and American music festivals, and this is kind of what I want to ask you about. Like,
Yeah.
because during that experience that I had I took 10 hits of LSD at that music festival, really, really large dose, and brother, it felt like I puddled, and it felt like I was baptized, and an old raspy gentleman who I could also tell had probably been through several puddles came up to me, put his hand on my shoulder in the middle of my puddle, and said some shit to me that just truly felt like the next generation was ushering me into it, and yeah, I just like I'm curious, how did like because now you operate within this space of you can be more transparent, and you like I said you utilize psilocybin a lot, but like what is your thoughts on the whole LSD thing, and like how did that shape, how did those experiences within the LSD sub music festival culture shape you as a human being, and like also I get this sense with all of these compounds, with all of these plants, right? That there's a spirit attached to them. And it's that spirit attached to them is a very important aspect of all of this. And I don't know exactly what it comes from. I think it's a myriad of different things, you know, other people having interface with it before us, the whole sort of culture and preconceptions that go around it, the set and setting. But like with LSD, I get this feeling that there's a spirit to it that is, I don't want to say, it's like the American subculture, don't tread on me, like whatever, like, you know, anti-establishment spirit, it feels like is entwined into LSD. And I don't know, do you feel the same way?
Absolutely, and you're
Yeah.
100% hitting the nail on the head. What makes LSD so special is the Americana aspect of it. I do recognize it was created by a very genius scientist in Switzerland, but what really happened, what really brought LSD out onto the streets was that back in the early 60s, there were some really elite people in California that had LSD and they were doing it, and it was like $100 a dose, and we're talking 1960 money. So they were gatekeeping. And what happened was that there was this group of guys, they eventually became called the Brotherhood of Eternal Light. But originally at that time, they were stick up men. They literally went and they just robbed people. That was what they did for a living. They just went and robbed. And they knew these people had this LSD. They knew how expensive it was. So they're like, fuck it, we're going to rob these people. So they show up gunpoint. They go in, bust in these guys' house. They don't hurt anybody, but they take all their LSD. And then what happens is, instead of like trying to sell it or whatever, they're like, we might as well try this stuff. They take the LSD, and they took a big doses of LSD. And then after that night, they threw all their guns away and they decided that what they were doing was wrong for the earth and that they needed to spread LSD to the people to teach them about themselves. So, like, this was like how LSD started in the street like that. And then the next big awesome connection is that if you see the Still Your Face behind me, that Grateful Dead symbol right there, that
Yeah.
was created by Owsley Stanley, he was the first, he was an integral member. He wasn't a musician, but he was a super genius sound engineer. And he created all the LSD that hit San Francisco.
The
And
Owsley recipe, right?
the Owsley recipe was the
Yeah.
best first street LSD that was ever invented because he was a super genius. He spent his time, he went to like the Berkeley laboratory. He was actually a Navy scientist before he got out of the Navy. Then he was doing all of his own weird things. He figured out how to make some methamphetamine so that he could make enough money to buy the equipment to do the LSD. And then once he made a LSD, the only published recipe to make it was you had to make 10 grams of LSD. Well, what are you going to do with 10 grams of LSD? So basically, he gave away at least half of it, sold some of it just to recoup the money to be able to do it. And then he still had all his money left over. So he happened to be friends with what turned out to be the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead were just a bunch of hippie guys hanging around. And Owsley decided to start throwing these acid tests. But it was like, they didn't know what to do with the LSD and they didn't know how to get rid of it. So they're like, for $1 a piece, you get a Kool-Aid cup full of LSD when you walk in the door. Maybe there's some music. Maybe there's some people having sex. Maybe there's whatever. But that's how this all really started as a truly American counterculture phenomenon. And then guys like Ken Kesey, famous author, he built this bus. And this bus, they travel the country just finding weird people and dosing them with LSD. And like, so when it comes back around to your whole Americana, it's really an American phenomenon that this drug spread on in this way and changed the hearts and minds of so many people. And like that brotherhood of eternal love, that gang that turned into a love group, they sent millions of doses of LSD to Vietnam so that the soldiers would stop listening to the government. So that's also another reason that the government is going to hold out very long on LSD, is because they're afraid of the social impact that LSD can have in such a small format.
Right, right. And I think that was the thing that really sort of alarmed them. But I mean, there was multiple aspects to it, but that was a very alarming aspect to it back in the day as well too. Is like, oh shit, the ability to distribute it at the scale that you could with something like LSD, just due to its extreme potency and deliverability and like all of these different things, it truly could turn everyone on. And like we see a somewhat like, to me that was emblematic of sovereignty, like personal sovereignty, because when you have a very saturated market like that, what it does for the end consumer is it ultimately leads to better accessibility at better prices. And we see a similar thing going on with psilocybin right now, where for the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, more people have been coming onto it, learning how to grow it for themselves, and that makes it very affordable and accessible for a lot of people. But at the same time, LSD is just like this one where if you have like the right chemist, he could put the entire country on. Um, so with the Brotherhood, do they still persist in any sort of fashion?
Yes,
Yeah.
they definitely persist. Most of them moved to Canada, and they did most of their work. Their largest lab was busted in 1996 when Nick Sand was their best chemist. Um, Nick Sand was also the first person to ever smoke DMT, but that's a side story. Um, so that they continue. I have had some of their products. They're still incredibly high quality. Um, the way that the LSD underground really works, there's only about 5 or 6 groups of people in the entire world that make it because it takes such a amount of knowledge and know-how. But
And connections to get the precursors and money and yeah.
the main precursor that's difficult to get is agronomine tartrate, which is a little tricky, but in some countries it's sold as a headache medicine. So
Mhm.
if some batches of LSD, if you bring them to a mass spectrometer and test them, you'll find trace amounts of caffeine because that's the starting ingredient that they use, which I think is really
Interesting.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
But now I don't know if you've heard of this guy Willie Myco. He's been out like a little bit on YouTube and stuff.
I haven't.
So he's the first person he funded a university in Pakistan, like over $100,000 to get all the permits to film every single step on how to make LSD. So now
Whoa.
it's not no longer going to be a hidden thing that only 5 people in the world are going to know about. So I really think in the next 10 to 20 years, LSD is going to blow up big time.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's LSD, it's different, and it's I think it's important because it has, at least within my own experience, and because I've experienced this, I could see how this would work similar for others. But it's very similar experientially and all the things to psilocybin, but it's so different too. It absolutely over the years has fallen into this place for me of like its own tool in its own way. It used to be this back and forth or different, they were kind of like different flavors of one another. But one thing that is very reliable to me about LSD is at the beginning of this podcast, you mentioned this sort of state that you're in right now, and it's due to a lot of heavy internal work that you've done, and you're in a very sort of malleable state. I think the way that you put it was you feel highly emotional, but yet like a Care Bear. Um, and there's like a certain I think you can get to this place in a lot of different ways, right? And there's almost like a sort of peeling of the onion layers sometimes to get there. But man, there's something about a very large dose of LSD that reliably puts me in that state for a good week or two afterwards. And it's yeah, there's a lot of focus and money and different things going into the research behind the therapeutic value of psilocybin and how do we build the matrix around it to make it the most efficacious and affordable and accessible for people and things like that. But I truly believe we should be doing the same thing with LSD. And I say that, but I feel like we already kind of are and have been at the same time, you know?
It's like
Um,
we're doing slight work with LSD right now, but I think like I was talking about before, the government has put like a lot of roadblocks in the way for it because of their fear of its power. And I think the reason that psilocybin is getting more widely accepted is that it fits into a lot of markets where like it can be grown at home, and then some people feel it's safer because it's grown medicine. But I don't subscribe to that necessarily. But I actually feel like the therapeutic benefits of LSD can be a lot better in a lot of ways because I feel that once you get through the come up of LSD, the mind state is a lot clearer, and I feel like you can integrate like really big ideas that are really special and really
Mhm.
meaningful for you in your life. And for me, I'll share one that happened the other day that I was sitting there and I just started to realize that like our life, like the whole big bang of this life as a universe, is like one big sand mandala. And then there's like space monks or gods or whatever, and they're like sprinkling all the little dust that makes all the little pieces of our life. But I was able to see even the beauty and all the darkness and the deep moments and the hardships. And I was just able to see that this was all such a beautiful package, but yet one day it will be swept away. And like something like that is something I wouldn't have come up with just like sitting here on a Tuesday. And that like has just been like a deep thing I've been able to share with people, and it's felt really special. And I'm definitely an advocate to determine like what the next steps of LSD will be. My fear is that the pharmaceutical companies are actually all trying to develop versions of LSD that doesn't make you trip.
Right.
I'm like, I feel like that's like a big part of what makes it special.
Yeah, and it's this weird intermingling of our current sort of westernized programming and systems with, and integrating these very archaic, ancient, ceremonial, mystical practices that human beings have been probably doing since the dawn of time, but yet we're trying to merge it with this thing that we've created, this system, and
No, but I mean, with merging all those systems, I can totally understand where you're coming from because part of my practice is like because I'm not like a wisdom tradition holder. I'm just a human, and I like always want people to know that I bear witness to your process, but I'm not your process. So a lot of the preparation work is developing a system to make it feel divine for that person, but for what that means for them, not me. So I don't
right.
bring in all like if they want me to bring in some cool trinkets and weird psychedelic things and things that are meaningful to me, because that means something to them because I'm bringing it and that's important. I do that, but it's really mostly focused on helping them develop what's going to be meaningful for them in their experience and what's going to help them grow as a person. And I think that special aspect of the psychedelic relationship is something that not everyone in my space is really working with, and it's something that I'd love to encourage people to develop more as co-create a spiritual tradition for yourself and for your people and allow it to grow, allow people to add to it and like allow that special space to develop because you'll gain a lot more from the experience and especially from your integration. Because if you brought something that was so meaningful into your preparation and it follows through to your integration, it's much more likely to stick in that neuroplasticity aspect of the brain.
Yeah, I love that. I love that insight. I was recently talking to a gentleman and I kind of asked him this question of like, with all this coming into play, like how do we, because it seems like the matrix that goes around these drugs, these psychedelic drugs, is so incredibly important. I was asking the question of like how do we build a healthy, efficacious matrix for that here in our Western world, and essentially the answer that he came up with was what you just told me, is like I think it exists at the individual level. I think that any sort of dogmatism of this is the right way for me or for them, so it's the right way for you, is absolutely incorrect, and it has to be done at the individual level. And I agree with that. And yeah, the thing you said about them making, trying to make these different types of LSD that maybe don't make you hallucinate, and there being all this money and investment into some of these compounds. Like it's interesting to me, I'm glad that like in general there's more awareness and more effort and more money and resources put into trying to discover these things and interact with them better and stuff, but it simultaneously kind of frustrates me. And I think that it comes from the place of, I think something that most psychonauts feel from the very beginning is like, okay, they're here, like the medicine is already here, it's already been here, but just like it's essentially being held up by bureaucratic bullshit. And this whole like chasing, like how much money is being spent on trying to figure out if we can make LSD not hallucinogenic or not visionary, when motherfucker, I think like part of the very essential part of that matrix is the fact that it is visionary, you know. And like why are we even like, how much money has to go into an endeavor like that? And like me and you're like, I truly hope if there's $500 million spent on that, I hope that it's able to help one person out there somewhere. That'd be great. But like, let's be real, man. Me and you both like intuitively probably kind of know and feel like that's not a good use of our resources as a collective.
No. And they did make one drug that is actually useful for that, and I'll give them credit, but it wasn't that hard to do. What they did was they made a version of LSD that basically has molecules out the side that make it too large to cross the blood-brain barrier. That one is useful for people who have extreme cluster headaches. I'm going to give them tons of credit for that, but I'm like not giving them credit for like all these other ones. They're like, we're going to give you this LSD that doesn't make you trip, but like your anxiety is going to go away. And like, I don't know, that part I'm kind of a little bit more skeptical about, but
Mm-hmm.
they've been doing a lot of studies with that recently as well.
I think like the cluster headache thing is really cool, and I think that that's very useful. I'm also happy that they found that for people, but I get this feeling that the incentive behind that and the incentive behind all of it isn't because they're dying to help people. It's, I think it's because it's this merging of these things with the current system, and I think the current system, human beings are incentivized by money, and within that, so like because of that, they're reaching and they're trying to create their own compound, right? That they can claim and that they can end up making a bunch of money off of in the future. You know, they wouldn't dump $500 million into some of these things just in the hopes of maybe helping one person out there. I think that would be great if that was their intention, but like the intention, and there's whole teams that go behind, like, all right, you know, financially, like, do we think we can recoup this in the future? Um, yeah, and it's once again, it just it feels as if like though it's kind of like this carrot on the stick, you know, like okay, maybe you know, it's like the the Rick Doblin stuff. Like I was really rooting for that. I wanted that. I think a lot of people did. Um, you know, but then like whenever it got rejected, and we can talk about the nuances of that if you'd like, but whenever it got rejected, there was just like this feeling to me of like, fuck, man, like okay, like maybe like in 2028 now or whenever it is, but like, and like I hope that they do, but goddamn, like how many people are going to lose their lives in between here and then, you know, because of bureaucratic bullshit.
So you
um
get a bunch of people like me running around and just doing the work anyway because it needs to
yeah.
happen. People need the help right now. And there were like so many different dimensions of like what happened with the MAP side of it, but like spinning back around a little bit to like the LSD and the psilocybin. The thing that I find that's really like controversial right now is that most of the companies that are doing clinical trials, because I'm in this community, I have friends that work in the legitimate side of the stuff. All of the molecules that they're trying to do work with are not actually psilocybin. They take like an analog, not like the research ones that we can get, but like something very similar to like a psilocybin or something. And they're doing all the tests on that because they want to be able to make all the money on it when it comes out. That's why they're doing it. And that frustrates me so much because psilocybin has been in nature as long as like mammals have been around, and like to be able to profit off that so heavily has really been something that's been really like it's been getting to me. And then like the Rick Doblin aspect of the like MDMA stuff, I think was actually like a smart business move for him to get away from the therapeutic side of it and stay more on the activism side. Because I think
Mm.
Rick is a much better activist than he is like a CEO type businessman. And I'm like the least businessy person, but I could see that his approach was too warm and fuzzy. I'm a hippie, but I'm still going to call it. It was too much of a hippie approach. Like they needed more hardcore science people to convince. the more hardcore science people that this was going to be a good approach. And a lot of the ways that they wrote the paperwork and everything for the studies, it was all very heartfelt and warm. And all my Naropa friends thought it was beautiful. But then my nerd side of it was like, oh shit, this is not going to work because you can't convince hardcore science people warm and fuzzy things, even if the data is still the right data. It was the way they compiled it and put it together. So now you have the VA putting a ton more money into it, which is ridiculous because the FDA is paying to say we can't do it on one side. But VA is paying all the money to happen on the other side. So I feel like it's going to take a little bit longer, but I'm still going to be one of the early adopters because it needs to happen. Yeah, I've seen huge things happen with people's PTSD, even from one MDMA guided session. So I feel like there's spaciousness for it, and we're just going to have to see where this new like Lycos Therapeutics goes with it. I mean, I'm skeptical because the new CEO is the guy that got Spravato to go through the ketamine spray, but
Hmm.
also in a way he was a good enough businessman to pull that off. So maybe we just need a good enough businessman to get the MDMA out there, and then let the heartfelt loving therapist work with it.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think about the so in regards to the matrix? I know I've used that word a lot. The matrix around MDMA. What do you think about the importance of there being some sort of facilitator or licensed therapist or therapist that you've been working with? I guess like my question here is how vital do you think that that aspect is to the healing nature of MDMA? And do you think that it necessitates that? Do you think people have that innate sort of healing potential on their own? Because like this is honestly something I go back and forth with a lot, man, because I see and feel how important the matrix is for myself and has been within my own experiences. Like of course set and setting, like what my intentions, but truly what I think it comes down to is like the full accumulation of who you are as a human being, that goes into each and every experience. But like, with that being said, so I can see like how having a licensed therapist could be potentially like rocket fuel for somebody's healing journey. Um, but then I also think that done incorrectly, it can also become a trap where people feel as if there's this sort of white lab coat syndrome and throwing the hands up and please help heal me. Um, and it's not that I think that that's a blanket statement. I think it's such a spectrum of possibilities that exists within this, but I can see how that can become a trap for people as well too. And of course, like we need to train therapists correctly to, help them kind of co-create that matrix like you were describing, right? Um, but yeah, man, I like if MDMA becomes say like legalized through this, um, it's going to sound extreme, but like, there's like in rural Kentucky, I almost guarantee you there's a gentleman right down the street from me who desperately needs a very efficacious MDMA treatment, but probably doesn't have even like $500 to throw on that, you know? And I've had experiences in the woods with my best friend that have felt just as breakthrough and revolutionary for me as any other sort of matrix that I've built for myself. So yeah, I just like I don't know. Like, could you comment on this, the sort of matrix around MDMA? Because I feel like it's one that I'm still piecing together in my mind.
So, from my perspective, I really do believe there are people who have an innate heart ability to be able to hold space. Like someone like you, just from the short conversations we've had together, I feel like you are tapped into like what that is. And I feel like that doesn't mean you need a master's degree to be able to be an MDMA therapist. I feel that the best thing that we could do rolling this out would be to have like maybe like a 1 year certificate type program for people. So that way, at least like the bare minimums of safety, like the bare minimums of like how to hold people's traumas and in ways that you may have not thought of and they may not have come up for you before because you're not like a professional in this industry. But having like those basic parts of training so you know what to do when something goes sideways would make you a really, really good sitter. I feel that it's overkill to require like physicians and like masters therapists and psychologists and all these people. I mean, they can also be great sitters, but I don't think that that's a necessary component. I think it can just be helpful to also work in a team. So my ideal kind of situation of this would be to like work in a multidisciplinary team of people who have different backgrounds. My background comes from nursing, but from inpatient psych. Other people's background might be autism. Other people's might be death and dying. Other people. So having all the different people that kind of can handle different parts of the space, it would be great to have like a network where you can work together and decide who the best people to help those people would be. But I definitely don't think it requires this like high level of education. It requires a higher level of vetting. So I feel like if there's a way that we can come up with a system to make sure we're keeping an eye on these new facilitators and doing supervision, like as Colorado rolls out their psilocybin program to the next level, my next step will be to do a 40-hour practicum, which will be very supervised, didactic, working with a partner and switching. And then it will also require 50 hours of outside supervision. So there's a safety factor of like people are looking at the work you're doing, they're seeing what you're doing, they're giving you commentary on things that you can do better. They're also building you up and showing you the things that you do really well. And I think if we just honor having some systems like that in place, it would be a lot safer for everybody involved because I'm sure there are people with great hearts that haven't had any of these trainings that would be awesome at it. I just think it would be better that we're all on the same basic pages of knowledge for the basics. So that way, when things go wrong, we have a system to follow.
Yeah, and what you're describing to me sounds and feels more like what, without interference and oversight, what we collectively would fall into naturally. Kind of like, all right, like, like we create this safe space for one another, and like if you want to like do this and hold this for people, like maybe the vetting involved in that comes down to who you are as a person and your experience with this thing rather than your PhD. And like I feel like collectively we would all kind of fall into this sort of space without any sort of governmental oversight or rules. And it kind of comes back to what I was saying about music fest. I think in a way that we have, of course, they're not optimal, not optimized and stuff, but like in a way we've collectively kind of been falling into that anyways. Like there's these, um, so yeah. And so you mentioned that things are changing, shifting there in Colorado with psilocybin. Could you update us and tell us what is going on, brother?
So right on December 31st, they finished the last of the paperwork that they need to make the next level rollout. So the next level, people who are in that level have applied to become official psilocybin purveyors for medicine centers. So right now, guys that have been growing anyway in the state are now submitting their mushrooms to laboratories that are approved by the state. Once those mushrooms become, certified that they're safe and don't have heavy metals and the basics of all of that, then I can go to the next level of programming, which will be the state won't allow me to train until the mushrooms are legal. So first we have to start with legal mushrooms. Then I can do my 40-hour practicum. Once I have that, I'll have a provisional license. And then there'll be a 50-hour supervision, either working under some people that have been licensed in Oregon and other people that are involved in the system a little bit deeper. But they'll have like videotape supervision. So that way we can look at what happened during sessions and really understand how we can build upon that process. And after that, I'll be fully open and licensed to work at any of the healing centers. And there are going to be different levels of healing centers in Colorado. There'll be a micro size healing center and a macro size healing center. The only main differences are the amount of mushrooms you can have on hand. And I really, from my past experience working at an ayahuasca retreat center, I'm not interested in having large groups. Groups of 3, 4, or 5, like that's manageable for me. But I don't foresee myself wanting to have groups of 40 again. it's just too much for me. So that's kind of the way things are rolling out right now. The interesting thing about the Colorado system that I really appreciated and the reason I moved here as opposed to Oregon is that they have three levels of licensure. They have a basic licensure where you can have a basic high school education, care about psychedelics, care about people, go through all the basic safety training so that you can be a facilitator. You're just not considered a therapeutic level facilitator, which the next level up will be for trained professionals, people who are therapists, doctors, nurses, these other levels of professionals. And it will just have more levels of insight that are involved. And then the extra special thing that I thought that Colorado did that was unique is they also have a third license for provide indigenous providers. So they're respecting people who have been working with the medicine for many years. They can get licensed. They also all three licenses have the basic minimum safety training and rules, and we all have the same rules, but they're respecting all the people in different ways to allow different styles of facilitators to all be involved in the healing system. So I think that's really special.
That's beautiful, man. That's really exciting. And obviously we'll have to see how it plays out and stuff, but I like that. I like that model. Yeah, I like that, and it's cool that they're grandfathering in giving the option for the indigenous facilitators and things like that. Like we were just speaking about, I think it's really cool that they're letting people who aren't, PhD therapists get involved as well too. Because like we just described, I think that some of those people are probably some of the most qualified. We'd be really doing ourselves a disservice as a collective by not allowing them to participate in that fashion. And so like um, before all this, the sort of like current state of psilocybin in Colorado, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been decriminalized,
Yes.
and so you've had to be more not underground about it, but it's been more of a gray market area for you in your facilitation and doing of these things, just like everybody else who is. But now it sounds like coming more out into the light. You can operate more in the light with it. It was really interesting. I went to Denver a few months ago. I should have hit you up, man, whenever I was there and met up with you, but it was a really quick trip. I was only there for a couple of days. But I went to Denver a few months ago, and while I was there, I was really interested, and I just wanted to know for myself, like, okay, so I've heard that psilocybin is decriminalized here. How do people go about getting it? How do people go about acquiring it in Denver? And
Yeah.
so it was very quick, man, very easy for me to figure out. I went to a head shop. I asked the gentleman, I said, hey, where do I get some of those mushrooms? He said he pointed over to the corner of the room where there was a stack of newspapers, picked up the newspapers. There's all sorts of advertisements and these people you call. And whenever I called them, it was interesting because it was, very much as if like I was talking to any other person selling me any other product or what have you. But at the end, he was like, but this is very important. This is like you're making a donation to us. You're not buying this from us. You're making a donation to our church.
Right.
Um, yeah, and I thought it was like super interesting. And I was like, okay, this is bizarre. Like,
There have been a couple bizarre loopholes in the way that people have been doing mushrooms in the state, but um, for people visiting, there are a lot of those kind of options, but like the psychedelic community in Colorado is trying to like shut down a lot of those people because they don't want it to turn into like a dispensary business.
yeah,
So what's happened for me, like I haven't had to buy mushrooms the entire time I've been here because all the local groups run gifting events. So all you have to do is show up with the ID that you're 21. And in Colorado, under Prop 122, you can just give away mushrooms. So for me, I've just been getting them for free. It's been really great. But there are a number of people doing like they call it consultation services. Like I'm going to consult you for this amount of time, and then you get this many mushrooms, which is kind of it's kind of getting away from the spirit of the law. So I'm an anti-establishment person anyway, but I'm working in a state that's trying to establish a way to help me in my career. So I'm trying to be like careful about how I approach those kind of situations because I don't want to be caught in the weird spot like that.
Yeah, another really weird spot and representation of this that I recently experienced, and I don't even know what the legality is of all of this. And but I was at a music festival in Northern California, and there was these gentlemen who had a tent set up and a whole area set up where it was the ketamine research clinic. It was just a tent where they were giving people ketamine. And when you walked up to them, they were the Dissociators Association of Dissociating. The dad. And so you had to make a donation to dad. That was how it worked. You made a fucking donation to dad, the church, and then they could gift you with the ketamine within the research center. And the research center, by the way, it was a tent, dude, in a fucking grimy. I say grimy. It was beautiful, but you know how these
Oh,
things
yeah,
are. A
yeah.
fucking tent at a music festival with dudes who super sweet guys, but like they were all probably suffering from like kidney failure. It looked like the way that they were, you know what I'm saying? There's a certain way that people lose themselves to something like dissociatives, and you can kind of see it. There's certain telltale signs, and these
I mean,
gentlemen,
yeah,
yeah,
it ruins your bladder, but then it also, from my experience of people that use ketamine too much, it brings out very odd, bizarre parts of their personality, almost like the conspiracy parts come to the surface more. And I've noticed that a lot with people that have used ketamine. And like, I'm no like saint. I've definitely used ketamine and everything before, but it's a very slippery slope. And I recommend that if you're gonna do it, you only do it like a couple few times a year because it gets really heavy. And
yeah,
what they're doing is just all sketchy and weird. That's not a thing.
right, absolutely. And it was, I found it so fascinating, dude. Like once again, I fully recognize that what they're doing and how they are going about it is not optimal, and it's like, not the way that I would go about it, and it's not the way I would encourage others. But it was very emblematic of this entire place that we're in as a country and as a collective, that these dudes in Northern California had this tent set up where they're K'd out, getting people K'd out, and telling you to make a donation to their church. You know what I'm saying? And I was like, wow, this is where we're at with psychedelics. And I don't mean that like that is emblematic of it all. I don't, but it was a very interesting emblematic point that I experienced, and I was like, this is fucking crazy. Like, what is going on? Like, this is such a powerful little time warp tool truly that they're using. And like, I don't know, brother. I just like, um
California has gotten weird. Like if you even like if you go to Oakland and you go to like a regular weed dispensary, all you have to do is ask for the secret menu, and they have 10, 20 different types of psychedelics you can just buy over the counter from them. It's really wild how far things are changing in this country because Oakland decriminalized all the psychedelics, so all the shops just sell them now. Like
yeah,
things are just getting really weird.
yeah, yeah. And there's this whole sort of, with that, there's this whole sort of weird merging and market I've noticed of, like, with say psilocybin is a great example of this, because it's like, it's nature, it's medicine, it has nature's intelligence, it's the full spectrum form, it's a way in which people can grow it themselves, they can take it, it's nature, it's all those things. But also, like, there's a huge market around the um, manufacturing and the distribution of consumer ready products with something like psilocybin, gummies, chocolate bars, fucking, and I know they're not real, I know they're research chemicals, but people are trying to sell psilocybin vapes and stuff now. And the same thing is happening with fucking pharmawaska. And like, once again, not saying I think it's all optimal or whatever, but it's
Yeah,
just the entire thing is so fascinating to me, man, and every aspect. One thing I kind of wanted to ask you about,
yeah.
I saw an article here recently. um, I don't know why I hadn't even like considered this aspect of psilocybin mushrooms, but it's like, of course, this is happening. But this article was talking about how, similar to cannabis, whenever cannabis became sort of heavily adopted and there was a much heavier market and more transparent market around it, booming across the United States, with that, very quickly came this rise almost across the board in the potency of cannabis. And we're seeing a similar thing happen right now with psilocybin mushrooms, where because of genetics and the demand and supply and demand and like all the things, like psilocybin mushrooms are becoming stronger. And like I've only been, I would say, in the game, like taking psilocybin mushrooms for a good 6 years now. But even over the course of that time, man, they've changed a lot. Your typical um, black market product that you might get around here, whether it be the actual mushrooms themselves or a mushroom chocolate bar, just the mushrooms seem stronger. And what are your sort of thoughts on all of this?
So I think a lot of it has to do with people are getting a lot better at the cultivation process and like also the preservation process. So things are getting dried better, so they're lasting longer, so the potency is better. People are using them more frequently, so they're not sitting on the shelf as long, so you have less degradation in the products. I definitely think genetics are a major component of how things are getting stronger, but the strongest genetics that have come out are the type of mushrooms that are no longer their genetics are so poor that they can actually not create actual mushrooms again. They're just like making cultures and then they have these freaky tidal wave kind of things that are happening. So I feel like there's just been a lot more exposure for people, and then the products that people are getting now are just they're just better products overall. There's definitely been an increase in the amount of psilocybin in some mushrooms, but I don't think it's a huge thing. I think a lot of it is the preservation and actually people just taking a better care of it. Colorado is a really unique situation. We had this was our second year of the psilocybin competition to see who had the strongest one. So out here, there's definitely been a big race to see who can come up with the strongest mushrooms. And for me, I choose to stay away from the like tidal wave versions because I just feel like to me there's almost like it's like you made the mushroom so messed up it's not even a mushroom anymore, and like something about the like life cycle of it that I don't like, that like you've destroyed it so much that it can't even reproduce on its own. So for me it's
Mm-hmm.
like a personal feeling. That's why I really don't like penis envy mushrooms either, because they also cannot really reproduce, and after 7 cycles they have to start all over again. So like for me, my favorite strain right now is probably Nomac, because they still will produce spores, they produce good fruiting bodies. But it's there's just so many factors in taking psilocybin as to like how it's going to make you feel in the sentence setting and all that. I just can't speak to exactly how much stronger they are, but
Mm-hmm.
I think if you knew the right people back then, they're probably just as strong too. But I've been
Yeah.
growing. I started growing like 17, 18 years ago. So I was even the mushrooms I had back then were really good because they were coming right out of my batch. So like, I think I have a little bit of bias there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess like whenever I was reading this article, like I was thinking about, you know, and I don't think this always has to do with the amount of psilocybin within like the amount of psilocybin that you're consuming, but it does seem like there is this pretty decent variation in the potency of psilocybin mushrooms, especially when they're different batches or different mushrooms. But even mushrooms of the same like batch that I've taken, like this 2 grams felt way different than the 2 grams I took a week ago. Or there's a lot of, it seems like there's a lot of variation. And I just was like imagining, you know, another thing that happened at one of those music festivals was I got to try I got the chance to try a new, I forget the name of the strain. I'm really kicking myself over that right now, but there's this new strain of mushrooms that I got to try. And this guy, he's the most potent you've ever tried, super potent, all these things. Brother, he wasn't lying. Like, I took half a gram and I was fucking floored. And I was thinking about this in terms of like, the average consumer, maybe someone who's like trying to get into it. And there's like, if you go on the internet and you're like, all right, I'm interested in psilocybin mushrooms. I'm like, I want to start experimenting with that. I want to get, people go online and there's a lot of widely accepted sort of dosage charts. You know what I'm saying? Like 3.5 is your kind of average. And if somebody had taken 3.5 of what the fuck whatever it was that I took that day, they would have met God and had a DMT-esque experience for 3 hours straight, yeah, and that's just an aspect of the. And I've seen this happen with cannabis too, where I've seen some people, they're like, I don't like cannabis, or cannabis isn't right for me. And I think and that has come from a place of the only cannabis they've tried is like the THC heavy sledgehammer flower that basically looks like extracts are dripping off of it. And it's like, well, there's a lot of these people that once they try a more balanced, less THC sledgehammer that has maybe a little bit higher ratio of CBD in it and things like that, some of these phenoids, like all of a sudden cannabis can become quite healing and enjoyable for them. So yeah, I just kind of like think about all of that with like psilocybin, what's happening here and stuff too.
And then even with the psilocybin thing too, like my friends and I, we have this thing we call it you got gnome. Like sometimes it doesn't matter what dose you get. It's just like the universe, these little magical gnomes come along and they just turn the volume up. And it's just sometimes it can be the same batch. There's just so many variables. And then even when you're talking about like taking from the same batch, a lot of times what happens is that mushroom cultivators will dry everything all in one batch, but different mushrooms came from different flushes. And
Hmm.
a lot of times, different flushes will have different amounts of different alkaloids in each flush. Doesn't mean that they're less potent, but one may have more psilocybin, one may have more psilocin, one may have more beta cysteine, and they
Hmm.
can have like entourage effects where it can change the overall effect. And it's all stuff that we're just figuring out now. And I think we're figuring out more of it now from the synthetic stuff because we can actually give someone psilocin pure and see what happens, and then we give someone baocysteine and see what happens. And that's the advantage of the lab stuff that's going on right now. Is at least we'll have a better understanding about how that interacts with the body beyond the mental aspects of it.
Yeah, and like you said, psilocybin, psilocin, and then baocysteine. I was just describing. It seems like for some people, the introduction of maybe a 1-to-1 ratio or however much CBD can heavily change the cannabis experience for them in regards to it, counterbalancing THC or whatever. But it makes me think about like something like baocysteine within psilocybin and like psilocybin mushrooms, because there's been so much emphasis and focus on psilocybin, but I get this feeling that the psilocybin experience isn't just psilocybin, and this is something that's been debated quite a bit. Some people say that the other trace alkaloids within there aren't in high enough contents to create a psychoactive effect or whatever. I don't know, because like there's a compound. I want to know if you've tried this compound, but it's called 4-ACO DMT,
Yeah,
and 4-ACO DMT is essentially the prodrug to psilocin. You take it same way that psilocybin is. I know you know this. I'm just saying this for like the
yeah,
audience.
of course.
Um, but essentially what it is synthetic psilocin, just straight psilocin is 4-ACO, or but that I love 4-ACO DMT, and it feels so similar to psilocybin mushrooms, so fucking similar, but it's different. You know what I mean? It's also at the same time feels very different to me. There's something about the full spectrum package with the psilocybin mushrooms that is not that one is necessarily better than the other. I truly think, once again, kind of like LSD, they each have their own use case for me in time and place. But yeah, I think that there's probably some of these other minor alkaloids within psilocybin that are having a very profound effect on the therapeutic output of it, the experience of it, and yeah, it would be cool to see us like start to breathe for higher amounts of like some of those things. Is any of that going on?
So in the studies that I know of, which are happening, like University of Wisconsin, and they are trying all sorts of varieties of psilocybin, psilocin, psilocin. They're trying all different combinations of these to see what is going to happen for specific conditions. A lot of it has been depression, but they're also doing work with postpartum as well. That's a lot of that's happening in Mexico. So they're definitely working to try to figure out that maybe if we take psilocybin and then we add like a certain amount of baocysteine, it may help the effect in an entourage way. But it's something that the medical industry it's just catching on to, probably maybe in like the last 20 years. It's like before the like U.S. medical industry was very focused on narrowing things down to the active ingredient and then making it that just that one thing. But now we're starting to realize that when you put certain things together in certain combinations, it actually can be more beneficial. It's just been it's hard to do a medical study in that way because the results get very skewed. So it's kind of we're in the in between time, but they're definitely trying to work that out. Not as much with the natural products, but I think if we can understand more from the pure products, then when we analyze these natural products, now that we have really good labs that you can actually send your mushrooms to, we could find the ones that are going to be beneficial for certain things. And that's a really beautiful place that we're coming into.
Right. And come back to like sort of incentive structures here with this. For the longest time, it has been like the reason why they're going after those isolated compounds is because, like we described, that they want to be able to profit off it after it's all said and done. But there's also like just to run these experiments for them to be official, it is so expensive. And whenever you're trying to do rigorous scientific research, any sort of variables that come into play can hike up the price of and the complexity of that research immensely, and so I think part of that has to do like this is part of that too. I think like that it's easier to study an isolated compound than it is to study the full spectrum of a plant, right? And like this is something that's even been reflected in like women's research, health research. Like this is there's a lot of more people are becoming more aware of the fact there's a bigger push towards, hey, we need to do more like research on women's health because there's all this research we've done on health for hundreds of years, but like a lot of it, and especially in the past like 50 to 100 years, a lot of it has been focused on men. And part of that is for a lot of misogynistic whatever type reasons, things, culture, but also a big part of that is because doing research on women is extremely more expensive, is a lot more expensive. And most of that comes down to the fact that they have these hormonal cycles and menstrual cycles. And that makes all research with women more expensive. Not saying it's right. Of course, we should take on the cost of that. You know what I'm saying? But like that is something that has influenced this as well too. And I think the fact that
And I think there's another big piece of why a lot of the research is not done on women. The reason they don't do a lot of medical research on women is that most medical research happens on people in their 20s and 30s, and women, that's their ages that they're most likely to have a child. And it's the risk of doing research on childbearing age women is too high to ensure, because if something happens to the babies, then it becomes a really big, expensive, huge problem. I don't know if you've ever heard of a drug called thalidomide, but it was a drug that happened, and that it basically was in the like 50s. They gave it for nausea, and the drug has a left-handed and a right-handed isomer. One of the isomers is totally safe and doesn't cause any problems, but the other one, when mixed together in a racemic mixture, caused hundreds of thousands of children to be born without limbs and really big birth defects. So since then, they've been extra cautious about giving women or trying anything on women. And just as a history thing, just so you know, like that's a part of why they don't do medical research with women as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting you say that because she didn't go into that level of detail, but I was just having this conversation with my girlfriend a few days ago, and she brought this up as well too. She had alluded to the fact that there was experiments done on pregnant women, and there was really bad results, kind of in a massive way, and that's a big part of it as well. She also offered me that insight. Yeah, man, this has been an awesome conversation. I'm gonna have to hop off in here in a few minutes,
Yeah.
but is there anything else that you'd like to leave people with, brother?
I just want to leave people just like knowing that they have all the space in themselves to do all the healing that is there and to not ever forget it. They should just remember healing comes from within. Healing does not come from other people doing things to you, for you. It comes from a space of you bringing yourself together into a space of oneness and a space of holistic healing where you can really focus on your own needs. And if anybody wants to find me, I'm definitely available. Silo James on Instagram. I also have Front Range Psychedelic on Instagram. So you can definitely contact me through there. I want to be able to help people in any way that I can. That includes just questions, answers. I'm not looking to like monetize everything. If you want to come to Colorado and do medicine work with me, please do. I'll also fly to other parts of the country if that's something that you need. But my main thing is just to support our community, send the love, and make sure everyone's taken care of.
Yeah, man. I I alluded to it within this episode, but I think that through all of this, and this new world that we're bringing in, I think what ultimately matters the most is people's personal sovereignty and retaining that. But I do think that, and I've said this many times before, the right sort of facilitator can truly serve as your rocket fuel. And so I think people need to be I think also the opposite is true too. I think that it can be very detrimental picking the wrong person. So I think that people should be very selective when doing that. And I'll just say that I've had a few conversations with James now, and he has awesome energy and stuff. And if I was going to be picking somebody, he'd be at the top of my personal list. So yeah.
And just as a final, if anyone wants to do a free Zoom call with me, I'm available most days, and I want to really take that time to answer any of the questions, let you see me, let you catch my energy, see if we're right together before we do anything. So please feel free to reach out, and I'm there for you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, brother. Much love.
See you next time. Take care.